Hey everybody, this is Pastor Pete. We're going to be getting started here in about 5 minutes. We've got about 5 minutes until it's going to be time to get started. So you are in the right place. Hey everybody, this is Pastor Pete. And we're going to be. I don't need to hear myself talking. That's going to be annoying if I hear that the whole time. So I'm gonna have to fix that. I know where that's coming from and I know how to fix it. So that'll be good. Anyway, just sit back. Glad we're gonna work a couple of these bugs out and then we'll be ready to go right at 6:30. All right, check, 1, 2. Audio check. There we go. right, good evening, everybody. We're so glad to have you guys on here tonight. We're still having people join every second, so not everybody's here yet, but we're going to go ahead and get started. It is right at 6:30. Hopefully you can see Abby and I both. We're kind of squeezing into the camera here. Not sure if y'all can see us. We're going to have our video off for most of this presentation, though, just to give you more screen room and ability to see the pictures. So we've got people from all over the world on here tonight. That's going to be fun. Got some friends from Canada. We have some friends from Africa registered. And we have our buddy Azar from over in Israel. He's going to be doing part of the presentation whenever we get to the section on Nazareth. And so I want to just thank him for jumping on here. It's about 2:30 in the morning his time. And so I just appreciate his friendship and his willingness to be a part of this. He may jump off when his section's over and go back to bed, which is perfectly fine. Just a couple of housekeeping things while we're letting a few more people into the group here. This is our virtual tour of the Holy Land. We want you to know, we need you to type in your questions into the chat box. Explore your screen a little bit, find the chat section, and use that for questions. Abby and I are going to be going back and forth tonight in the presentation, and when one of us is talking, the other one will be trying to do some chatting in there. Azar may be on there as well, helping correct us and keep us straight as we go through all of this. So use the chat box. I'm going to have you muted for the entirety of this. At the end, if we have time, which I doubt we will, but if we have time at the end, we may take a few questions that we don't get to in the chat box. But for the most part, I have you muted. You cannot unmute yourself. That is intentional. So we don't hear dogs barking in the background and kids asking for Cheetos and all the other things that go on with a crowd this big. So just know that you will not be able to unmute yourself. Also, please know that we cannot fit 10 days worth of touring into an hour and a half or a 2-hour virtual tour. So we are not going to be going to every single site. We're not going to see every single thing that you would see on a normal tour, but we're going to try to hit some of the highlights and give you guys some insights along the way. Really, our goal tonight is to give you a good taste of what a tour of the Holy Land looks like and feels like, and hopefully be able to teach you some things along the way. So thank you so much again for joining tonight, and just remember to check that chat section out and put your questions in there. As we get started, I want to say a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. They are the ones who make these webinars possible that I do once a month. If you're interested in joining me over on my Patreon community, you can use that website down there at the bottom, patreon.com/Pastor Pete. It's a group of people who help me do ministry stuff outside of Cowboy Fellowship. And they're also helping make it possible for me to hopefully get another book released in 2021. So super excited and thankful for those of you that are Patreons. And if you're interested in getting more content from me, that's a great place to get it. I put stuff up in there every single week throughout the year. Next order of business, we are going to be taking an actual trip to the Holy Land if we're able to in 2021. Of course, everything right now is somewhat up in the air due to the COVID stuff, but the plan right now is for us to be able to go. You may want to write this website down at the bottom, pastorpetetx.org. If you are interested in going on that trip, that would be where you would want to go and get all the details about how to join us on the actual tour. I'll put this up again at the end of tonight, so you don't have to worry about writing it all down now. I will tell you, I should have told you a minute ago, you probably do want to have a pen, pencil, something to write down things on as well as we're going through this evening. But if you are interested in going on an actual trip, not just a virtual trip, but a real trip to Israel, the Holy Land, you can find out more details there at pastorpetetx.org. Still have a few people coming in, but we're going to just dive right in. I want you guys to know that when we go on a trip to Israel, we really emphasize the experience of it all. We don't just go to see things, we go to experience things. Things like what you're seeing there on your screen in front of you: baptism, boat rides, Lord's Supper in the garden, walking the Via Dolorosa, floating on the Dead Sea, praying at the Western Wall, drinking from Jacob's well. These are experiences, just a few that we have along the way. We can't recreate that on the virtual tour. So tonight is going to be about seeing things, even though I would tell you that one of the greatest things about going on the trip is the experience itself. So let's start from San Antonio, Texas, and let's see if this is going to actually work. And maybe it's not. There it goes. San Antonio, Texas. We are on our journey toward Israel. We travel to Houston via I-10. We don't cut across the countryside like that, but that's the best I could do. We hop on an airplane. It's just a quick 5-second ride. And then we are in Istanbul, Turkey. And then from there, we lay over for a couple of hours, grab a bite to eat, and on our way down to Israel. So that is the route that we normally take: a charter bus to Houston, plane to Istanbul, Turkey, and then another plane down to Israel, short flight, not far at all. Here's a picture of my son, Peter, on our last flight. This is actually where we transferred in Istanbul and got on our next plane to go, and also a picture of some of the food we had on the flight. Listen, the flights aren't as fast as they just happened there on the screen, obviously, but they do everything they can to make them comfortable, and it's quite an experience itself just getting there. And once you are done with that flying, we're here. That was fast. You can tell this is the first picture we took after we landed on our last trip, and everybody's a little worn out and tired, but super excited. This is us on the bus. We're still at the airport in Israel, and we are ready to go. But it's late at night, so we're going to grab a quick night's rest at our hotel, get something good to eat, and then the next morning is typically when we start our tour, just because of the time of day that we get there. So our first stop on our virtual tour is just going to be a few miles from where the airport is, from where we landed. We're going to start near the Mediterranean Sea at Simon the Tanner's house. And this is where our virtual tour is going to begin. This is where our real life tour would probably begin as well. It's where I like to start. It just makes the most sense. So what you're seeing in the picture here is the rooftop of the location that is known as Simon the Tanner's house. This is what you would see right here on street level. Now, obviously, this is not the original house, okay? This has been rebuilt many times, but this is supposed to be the location of what we read about happening in Acts chapter 10. This is the location as to where it happened. The Apostle Peter was staying here at this location, and God sent a vision to a man named Cornelius, who was a centurion, and he was told to go and find Peter, send some people to find Peter here at this place. This also, interestingly, would have been the area that the port of Joppa would have been in. So this is where Jonah would have come. And as we kind of walk here, it's not really a boardwalk, but as we walk along the coast here, we can envision Jonah coming down and getting in his boat and running from God, as we read about in the Old Testament. So there's not a lot to see at this particular site, but it is pretty cool to just kind of start there and imagine what happens. And then we're going to hop back on a bus. We're going to drive a few miles north to the location of Caesarea. And it's one of my favorite locations on the entire trip. So this is a video of us in the amphitheater, short little video of us in the Roman amphitheater here in Caesarea. There's two Caesareas on our journey. This will be the first. This was a port city built by Herod the Great. He didn't start from scratch, I don't believe, with this city. There was another city here, but he's really the one who put it on the map in about 22 BCE. And he named the city and its harbor after Caesar Augustus, who was his patron and who really brought the funds for all of this and made Herod who he was. So the city really flourished under the Romans. And it's just an amazing sight if you like Roman history. If you like Roman history, like I do, this will be one of your favorite sites. It's also got a ton of spiritual history in it as well. This huge amphitheater that you're looking at right now, I forget how many people it seats, but it is just massive. And they still use it today for concerts and other public events. Again, it's been rebuilt, it's been reworked, but it's still in the same location, the same shape, the same size as it would have been back in the Roman days. I'm going to show you another picture here. This picture is taken with you standing essentially where the palace at Caesarea would have been. And you can see down there in the surf, I'm going to see, does my pointer show up? I don't think it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the pointer shows up. This right here, where my pointer is a swimming pool. If you can see it, you can actually see people down there in it. You can walk down there and get in this. This would have been a swimming pool for the king and for his guests and for the governors, the people who used the palace. This would have been used by Herod the Great and others who occupied the palace along the way. It was a lot deeper at one point, and the unique thing about this, from what I've read and been told, is it could be filled with fresh water or salt water from the sea, depending on what the king and his guests preferred or wanted. So, for the day and the time, there was a lot of technology here. Up here on the top, you can see some footings and some remnants of where the palace would have been, perhaps a balcony or a porch overlooking the sea and the pool area. In the New Testament, so this Caesarea is mentioned in the book of Acts in connection with Peter and Philip, of course, the Apostle Paul, really especially Paul. He was imprisoned here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that on our next slide. He spent a lot of time here and passed through here on several occasions as well. So this is just one of the views, and again, you can see the beautiful coast and Mediterranean Sea out there as well. So here's a couple of scriptures that go with this particular site. I'm not going to read them all for the sake of time, but I'll leave them up on here as I talk about them so you can read them, and you may want to write these down and go back and read them in their bigger context later. But Paul was in prison here for 2 years in Caesarea. We know that for some of that time, he was a prisoner inside of Herod's palace, where I just showed you. We don't know the exact location, but he was a prisoner inside the palace. We know that it's here in this palace that Paul's ultimate fate was sealed in Acts chapter 25, because he appealed his case to Rome. He appealed his case to Caesar. And that happened right here. I mean, it's pretty cool. You stand in the place or right around the place that actually happened. It was also here that Paul presented the gospel to Agrippa and shared his testimony in Acts chapter 26. I've got that part of that verse or part of that passage there on the screen for you. And it's just a great, powerful passage of the power and the testimony as Paul shared his testimony with Agrippa. We also know from Acts chapter 21, that tells us that Paul stayed here in the house of Philip the evangelist, who had a home here. It's believed that Philip was probably one of, if not the first person to bring the gospel to this thriving Roman town, this thriving Roman city, following the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's not 100% confirmed, is my understanding, but highly regarded and highly thought that the Apostle Philip is the one who came here after the Holy Spirit anointed them, and he came to preach the gospel here in Caesarea. We also know that Paul sought refuge here when he was forced out of Jerusalem for preaching the gospel. That's in Acts chapter 9. Paul stopped here between his second and third missionary journeys. In Acts 18, you can read about that. And then don't forget, this is where Peter was at Simon the Tanner's hut, and he was summoned here by the centurion, right? He made the journey from where we just were at Simon the tanner's hut up here to Caesarea to meet with Cornelius. And it was here that God finally got it through Peter's thick head that the gospel was not just for the Jewish nation, that it was for all men, it was for all people. And so we talk about these things and so many other things when we're here. I'm just kind of summing it up for time's sake tonight, but it is a powerful, powerful place, and really a place I could spend the better part of a day at, just because of how huge it is and how much biblical stuff happened here at this place. It's in Acts chapter 10, verses 34 and 35, where Peter says, "Now I really understand that God doesn't show favoritism." That happened right here. And so on a real tour, if we were really there and you could walk around, normally we would give our group about an hour to an hour and a half to then go and explore this amazing site and these amazing ruins after we've talked about these things and some other things. So let me show you a little bit more of the actual site. So this right here is a hippodrome. You can see the stadium style seating up here, and then there would have been a huge horse track that was kind of like a big oval over here where you see my cursor going. And when you walk down here, it looks small in the picture, but when you're walking that, it's a long distance to walk. So this was a huge horse track. The ocean is right over here. It's right on the ocean. You can just sit up here in these stands and imagine yourself 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, sitting here watching a great horse race, with the sun going down over the Mediterranean Sea. It's just absolutely fabulous. As you make your way deeper into this site, you'll see these mosaics, these Roman mosaics, which I am just fascinated by every time I go to Israel. There's actually one here in Caesarea that we know it was the tax collector's office, because the mosaic in the middle of the floor says tax collector's office. So pretty cool stuff that you can see that and stand there. You can't walk on these today, but you can get so close to them and just marvel. They didn't run down to Home Depot and slap these things together like we do today. Each and every one of these pieces of rock were hand chosen and hand placed into these huge mosaic floors, which is just awesome. So this is also a great site to get in the surf. We always get down in the water a little bit and cool off. And it's also a great place to buy an ice cream cone because there's a huge shopping center. So there's a picture of my son Peter doing both of those things. So this is a fabulous, fabulous place for exploring and looking at Roman history, and then obviously biblical history. So I'm going to turn it over to Abby for a second. She's going to talk about our next site. But before I do, I just want to remind those of you who are just getting on, put your questions, if you have any, over in the comment section, and we will respond to those comments throughout the presentation. So we're going to jump back on the bus, and we're going to make our way to our next site, which is Mount Carmel.
Hey guys. All right, so now here's a picture of Mount Carmel. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but whenever I was on my trip, we got to go up on top. This is from down in the valley. Here at Mount Carmel, the story of Elijah kind of comes to life. And in 1 Kings, you can find this story. This is where, and I'm going to show you a view from the top. Okay, so this is standing up on top of the mountain, and up on top of this mountain is right where Elijah was. He is the only prophet that's there, and all the other prophets are worshipers or followers of Baal. And so in 1 Kings chapter 18, Elijah goes before the people and says, "How long are you going to waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, then follow him." And the people said nothing. And so Elijah says, "All right, we're going to show everybody who the Lord is." And this is the exact area where Elijah would have built the altar to the Lord. Baal followers built their altar, and they both called on their gods to see who would bring down fire on the altar. And this is where God lights the altar up with fire from heaven. And then at the end of this is whenever Elijah says, okay, catch all of the prophets of Baal and let's kill them. And so you can see from right here, they take all of the prophets, the 450 prophets of Baal, down into this valley right here underneath the mountain, right in this area, and they kill all of the prophets of Baal. So just standing up here, you can just have this sense of God bringing fire down upon this altar right here on this mountain. And it's an amazing, amazing story and an amazing sight to see. There's not a lot up here. There's a statue of Elijah that's up there. But just knowing what the Lord did right there on that site is enough to just make everyone be silent for a while. So if you want to read about that site, it's in 1 Kings 18. I think it starts in verse 20, and you can read about that story. Anything else on?
No, I will say this is a good opportunity for us to kind of explain, like Abby and I have never gone to Israel together. I've been multiple times, she's been once, but we have not ever gotten to go together. And so I've never actually been up. We were talking about this. I've never actually been up on the top of Mount Carmel. I've driven by it. I've seen it, but I've never personally been up there. And so as we were putting this together, it was kind of neat because some of the places that I've been, she hasn't been, and some of the places she got to go, I haven't gotten to go yet. And so it just goes to show, when you go to Israel, when you go on one of these trips, there's so many places to see. You just don't get to see them all. And so every time I put a trip together, I try to make sure that I add one or two places that I haven't seen before, so I can get even a little bit bigger piece of the story. So that's just a good thing to put in there. All right, well, we're going to move on to Nazareth. So we jump back on the bus and we take a little journey to Nazareth. I'm going to see if I can unmute my friend Azer. Maybe. Give me a second here. Okay, so this is a view of Nazareth today, obviously not Nazareth in Jesus's day. And he, Azer, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me?
We're going to have to turn the volume up on our computer.
Yeah, I hear you well, Pete. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah, that's good.
So, guys, this is my friend Azer from Israel.
Yes.
He lives in Nazareth and runs a seminary in Nazareth that we at Cowboy Fellowship help support. And I'm going to turn it over to him. So, Azer, we've got a picture here, obviously, of your beautiful city. And then I have the Church of the Ascension is the next picture I have.
Well, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be with you. I've actually visited the church, I think, twice, and shared, but I met some of the people, and I'm so happy that I can jump into your webinar tonight. And actually, it would be nicer if we could meet face to face, but we all know about the challenging situation that we are all going through. But praise God, well, for every opportunity He's using us in these difficult times. As Pete was talking and sharing, I just was reminded again and again. It's like when you visit the country, when you visit the land, what you call it, the Holy Land, or the Israel and Palestine and all these areas, the biblical sites. Of course, I mean, our relation with God is something depends on a personal issue. But when we visit these places, we go back not reading the Bible in black and white anymore. We read the Bible with colors. It helps us understand places, the situations, the geography, and some of the history that of the land, and help us to understand some of the parables, some of the texts, some of the stories in a better way. Anyway, I'm not going to give a lecture tonight or this evening for you. I just want to share a little bit about Nazareth, and well, I think the most thing that the people remember, and I can guess what you're thinking, if there's any good thing comes out from Nazareth. And yes, the answer is yes, good things come out of Nazareth. It was Jesus himself who grew up in this little town, and this is probably this is the place where the angel appeared to Mary's, and it's a church, a fancy church around it, but it's a small house. If you can look inside, this is the small house where probably Mary lived, or in a very similar house like this that Mary lived in, and where the angel appeared to Mary and share with her about the birth and incarnation of Jesus. So when you come to Nazareth, these are the places. One of the major places you see, it's called the Annunciation Church. It's and as you visit the country here, and Pete mentioned a little bit about it, that you find buildings on top of buildings on top of buildings. This is originally a fourth century church, but it was destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt. And what we see, the recent church that we see on top of this house, it's a 1969 church. It's a big one, and it's the biggest church in the Middle East. It's a Catholic church, and it's the biggest church in the Middle East. Of course, there's other things in Nazareth. I mean, one of the major things also is that the market. I mean, you would go a short walk in the market, and visit the other church, what we call the Mary's Well Church. I think Pete have also a photo for this. Well, we jump to north. This is the we're going to speak about sharing about Luke chapter 4 when Jesus is shared in the synagogue, and he's sharing about the synagogue church. There is a synagogue in the old market. It's 11th century synagogue, but we believe, and it is synagogues are built on top of synagogues. They don't look for another place. So this is the synagogue where most probably that Jesus stood at and shared about him arriving. I mean, the Messiah is coming to set his people free and open the eyes of the blind and the freedom for the prisoner, and calling for the jubilee, the year of the accepted by the Lord. So this is another location. I mean, it's a major location, a very small synagogue, what we see clearly on the right side of the picture here. This is it's called the Synagogue Church, and also, I mean, walking from the Church of the Annunciation by the Synagogue Church, we will reach also what we call the Mary's Well. And in every small town, there is a well, and this place where usually women was their duty to go every day to fill their jars with waters and bring it home. And this is the way that Mary took every day to go and fill that jars with waters and bring it home. So these are the major three historical or biblical or historical and biblical sites that we will see. You would see in Nazareth as you visit, and the photo here is what we call Mount Precipice. Traditionally, it's believed that people of Nazareth wanted to throw Jesus out of this mountain. Whether it's the right place or not, something else. But from this place, the most important thing that from this place you can look. You are overlooking for several biblical and sites that took place. And I'm just looking at the photo. I did not see this photo before, but to the left of this, to the left side of the photo, you see a small mountain there, and it's called Mount Tabor. And traditionally, it's the Mount of Transfiguration. Uh, and and beneath on the bottom of this mountain, there is a small village, a Arab village, and a small kibbutz. The Arab village called the Buri, and the kibbutz called Devrat. And it's, if you're trying to connect it with a name in the Old Testament, it's Deborah. And this is the place of Deborah. This is where Deborah lived. And this is the plain that we see behind a group of people down. This is the plain that where Deborah and Barak fought Sisera. So this is just looking behind this area. This is the fight. Also, the small mountain in the middle there. This is a small village in Arabic called Nain. And this is the place that Jesus rose, the son of the widow. I think it's mentioned in Luke, that in the Gospel of Luke, and this is where Jesus passing by this village, and he was see a funeral for another widow, and her son is dead, and he rose, the son of the widow. And in the same mountain, to the right side of that mountain, if I can use the cursor, I don't know if you can see. Yes, more to the right, down. There's a small village called Shunem, and this is the Sulam in Hebrew, Sulam or Shunem, and this is where the Shunammite woman was, and where Elijah came from Mount Carmel, and we saw the mountain just before I shared, and it's probably about 30 kilometers, I don't know in miles, probably it's kind of 20 miles, a little bit more or less, and where Elisha came and rose the son of the widow, also the woman there. And if you read the gospel, the story in the Gospel of Luke about raising the son of the widow, the people there said there is a prophet is raised, a prophet is raised again amongst us. Why again? It's because they're connecting it to the same location almost where a miracle took place. I can mention more things here. I mean, in a clear, when you stand at this mountain, it's beautiful. It's fantastic views, and it's we can see the mountain that Saul and his 3 sons were killed at. We can see also where Ahab had his palace to the more. I mean, it's not in the picture here, but I mean, this is what you see when you come to Nazareth. And the most important thing in Nazareth, that is people are so friendly. It's a very hospitable town, and where people could enjoy, if you're staying there for a night or even a short time, you could enjoy the hospitality of people, good food, good drinks, good coffee shops, and also learning about the biblical issues. Nazareth is a small town. It's nowadays it's about 90,000 people. All of the people are Arab Israelis, but of course, it's a very peaceful town, so it draws a lot of tourists, but also local Jews and other Arabs from other countries. So we are a small, I said 90,000, but Nazareth serves a community of almost 250,000 people, because it's a central place, shopping, offices, hospitals, schools. So when you get into Nazareth, it's very busy. It's not easy to go through the main roads there. Hope to see most of you next year. And well, I will stop here. I don't know, Pete, if you would like me to add anything or mention anything, but I will stop here now.
You did great. Thank you so much for taking your time. Again, if you're welcome to stay on the call, but I know it's the middle of the night and you probably want to go back to bed. I do want to get in touch with you next week or sometime soon and visit about maybe doing one of these webinars just with you on some of the subjects and studies that you're an expert in. I think our people at the church would love that. Now with technology, that might be a good thing for us to do in the future. So thank
Yeah,
you
I will
guys.
be
Thank
more
you
than
so
happy to
much.
do it.
And
Yes,
I
please
appreciate it. You
do.
did a great job kind of explaining everything in that picture. And this is one of the things that I love so much about Israel. Anywhere you stand, anywhere you look, particularly from an elevated position, you can see so many different things. One of the
Yes.
things that Azar didn't mention is that this valley back behind here is also believed by many to be where the Battle of Armageddon is going to be fought. So you
It's Magidon's Valley.
get
Yes.
past, present, and future. Whenever you're in Israel, and in so many different ways, you can see so many different things. The valley down here is also where Gideon fought the Midianites, and just on and on and on. We could just keep going forever, but we're going to have to move on from Nazareth, or we won't get through the rest of the tour. So thank you so much, Azar. Appreciate
You're
your
welcome.
friendship.
You're
Appreciate you being
welcome.
on the call, and we'll look forward to hearing from you soon. All right, well,
Blessings,
we're going to
everyone.
move on from Nazareth, and we're going to drive through the little town of Cana, where Jesus did his first miracle, turned the water into wine. There's not a lot to see there. I didn't even put a picture. We don't even stop, but it is cool to kind of connect those dots and make our way over to the Sea of Galilee. We spend several days at the Sea of Galilee when we're on tour. We're going to spend a few minutes there here now. And Abby's going to talk a little bit about the Sea of Galilee in just a second, but I wanted to talk about this boat. Abby didn't get to see this boat. This is another thing that she didn't see on her tour. I didn't see it on my first tour, but saw it on my second, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's called the Jesus boat. We have no evidence to suggest that Jesus or Peter or any of his disciples actually used this boat or sailed in this boat. But we do know from archaeological evidence that this is a first century Sea of Galilee boat. So it was on the Sea of Galilee during the time of Jesus when he was here on earth. It was just unearthed in 1986. There was I'm not sure what happened there. There was a huge drought in Israel, and so the lake level went way down. And this boat emerged. They dug it up very carefully, and it's now been preserved. But what I love about it is it gives you a real firsthand look at what the size of these boats that Jesus and his disciples would have been in. And you can see how scary it would probably have been to be on this boat in the middle of the sea, particularly at night or in the middle of a storm or something like that. And so it's a great piece of perspective whenever you get to stand there and look at this first century boat that would have been like the ones Jesus and his disciples sailed on. So one of the things we love to do on our tour, and Abby got to do this, and so I'm going to let her talk a little bit about this, is we get to go out on the Sea of Galilee and go for a boat ride. So Abby, tell us a little bit about your experience doing that.
All right. This is one of my favorite pictures, and I loved being on the Sea of Galilee because so much takes place here that we can look back and read the Bible about. And even all of these hills that are around the Sea of Galilee, there's story after story that take place in all of these hills around it. So when we were on the boat here, the water was perfectly serene, and we got to watch the sun go down there. And then we stayed at a hotel here at the Sea of Galilee. And then in the next morning, I just got up early and caught a sunrise out there. And guys, just knowing that you're sitting on a boat at the same place that Jesus walked on water, it was surreal. And so for me, I just wanted to sit here and soak it up. I loved sailing around on this boat, and it just made it so special. The boat ride is really fun too, and this is the group that Pete and Peter were with, but the boat guides are great, and they can tell you everything you want to know about the Sea of Galilee. But we also did a little bit of a devotional there, and then they taught us some traditional singing and dancing while we were on the boat. So it's just a fun time for your group, and also just a really special time. So it was just one of the most serene places that I had been to, and one of the most special places to really just reflect on what had happened there, and reflect on how many times Jesus had challenged his disciples right here in a fishing boat on these waters. Just normal, you could see, just fishermen out there working, and kind of picture what it would have been like back in Jesus's day. So.
Yeah, this is us actually doing one of the dances. And another cool thing out on the boat is we usually have some time for prayer, where everybody just kind of goes to their own little place in the boat and just reads some scripture and praise. And it is a very, very moving, one of the most moving experiences on the trip for sure. Abby's also going to talk just for a second here about this next picture, which is the spot that is possibly, perhaps, believed to be where Jesus gave his Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes.
All right, so this is where it's believed that Jesus would have delivered the Sermon on the Mount. You can see the sea in the background. It was a beautiful green area. Of course, this building wouldn't be there, and all these new palm trees. But from what I have read, this would have been ample space here to gather a crowd out here for a message. It would have been, you can imagine Jesus just sitting here and teaching a peaceful and calm message here. It was so just calm and serene the day that we were out there. But really, the message that Jesus brought here in this area that's recorded in Matthew would have been really radical and really countercultural and really very revolutionary at this time. He was saying things like, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And he called his followers the salt of the earth. And he was saying things like, "Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And so you can just imagine the way that Jesus was bringing these thoughts that were against all the culture of the Jews that they had heard thus far, and sitting here and listening to him by the sea. But this, I also read, would have been out of the way of the farmers, so that they wouldn't have had a crowd sitting in the middle of wherever the farmers were farming. And now there's a church here, and you can kind of go up there and sit, and they have some tabernacles there where you can have groups that can gather there for a message. You can read all about the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 through chapters 7. So we're going to get back on the bus now and drive just down the road to Capernaum.
So in case you haven't figured it out, it's a lot of on and off the bus as we move from site to site. So this is Capernaum, the home of Peter. We know this was kind of the headquarters for Jesus during his ministry. Straight ahead, what you're seeing is a church. There's a church everywhere nowadays where something important happened or somebody important lived. And underneath this church, so this church is like built on these pylons here. And underneath is actually the home of the Apostle Peter. This is where the Apostle Peter would have lived. This is where Jesus would have stayed when he was in Capernaum. And this building has a glass floor, so you can go up in here and look down. Obviously, they don't let people go, walk and touch and stuff, or nothing would be there. So it's all roped off now, and you can see it from down here, but you can also see it from the top. What I love about this picture is it also shows how these city streets, these shops, these little perhaps rooms or dormitories would have been laid out. Obviously, the walls are much shorter. They didn't build them back full scale or full size, but this is how Capernaum would have been laid out during Jesus's day. Directly behind us, if we were to turn around and do a 180, we see the synagogue in Capernaum. Now, this is not the original synagogue that would have been there when Jesus was there, but as Azar said a few minutes ago, it's built in the same place as the synagogue that Jesus would have been in. Some of these stones, perhaps, there are various earthquakes and invasions and different things that knock these synagogues down. But a lot of times when they rebuild them in the same exact place, and they rebuild them with the same materials. So this would have been the synagogue where Jesus would have worshiped a lot, and he did a lot of things here. We could read those scriptures, but for the sake of time tonight, I'm just going to let you kind of look at that. Another awe-inspiring place to stand. Pretty much anywhere you go in Capernaum is awe-inspiring, because you know that Jesus was here. You know that Jesus did miracles here. You know that amazing things happened here. And so that's a picture of that. If we take another short bus ride just down the road and around the corner, we come to Magdala. And this is the synagogue in Magdala. It was uncovered not too long ago. I don't remember exactly when, but it is dated back to about the year 29. In fact, they found a coin, a Tiberius coin from 29 ACE on there, and it was found inside the synagogue, proving that this synagogue was a first century synagogue. It was there in the time of Christ's ministry. We know that Christ would have passed through this town based on geography, and know that he spent so much time in the area of Galilee. More than likely, he worshiped in this smaller, much smaller synagogue. You can see how small it is in the picture. Another one of the most beautiful things, I love these mosaics, but this original mosaic is still here. You can't walk on it, but you can get right up close to it. This was also the original home of a lady you might recognize, a lady by the name of Mary Magdalene. Mary was a Jewish woman, and according to the four Gospels, she traveled with Jesus as one of his followers, and she was a witness to his crucifixion. She was one of those who stayed around for the crucifixion. She didn't flee and run off. And another interesting thing about Mary is her name is mentioned 12 times in the Gospels. And that may not sound like a lot, but it's more than most of the apostles' names are mentioned. There are a few apostles that are mentioned more than her, but most of the apostles are mentioned less than Mary. And it's pretty incredible to think that she came from this area. And again, we know that Jesus spent time here. Very, very powerful and well-preserved site. So there's probably 30 other sites here around the Sea of Galilee. We go to many of them. We pack as many in over a 2.5 or 3 day period as we can. But for tonight's virtual tour, we're going to kind of start moving away now from the Sea of Galilee onto some other stuff. As we do, I want to take you to this shot. This is a picture of me baptizing my brother Jake in the Jordan River. This is something we always try to do on the trips. Again, we don't know that this is the exact spot where Jesus was baptized. In fact, we're pretty sure it's not, but it's the Jordan River, and it's an incredible thing to go and be baptized here in this place. This is near the Sea of Galilee, and it's something we do during our stay at the Sea of Galilee. So if you've ever wanted to be baptized in the Sea of Galilee, you gotta go to Israel for that to happen. Okay, we're going to move north a little bit more to the other Caesarea. I told you a minute ago that there's 2 Caesareas on the trip. So this is Caesarea Philippi. This is the furthest north that Jesus' ministry ever went. He came here to get away from the crowds and the persecution that followed his ministry. It's located in the southwestern base of Mount Hermon, and you heard Azar mention that a few minutes ago, I believe. And the Apostle Peter, James, and John were eyewitnesses to the transfiguration of Christ, which is believed to have happened here, very nearby. You can read about that in Matthew 17, 1-7, or Mark chapter 9, or Luke chapter 9. And it's also believed that the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years was healed here somewhere in this area as well. So again, a lot of biblical history. We talk about that a lot in more detail as we stand there. But the thing this place is best known for is what I have the scripture up on the screen for, and that is that this is where Peter confesses that Christ is the Messiah. This is where he said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said he was going to build his church and that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. Now, we tend to think of that as the gates of hell, but the interesting thing is here at Caesarea Philippi are these gates. And in Jesus's day, these gates would have had foreign idols, and there was a lot of idol worship in this area. And these were called the gates of hell. There's a huge hole in the rock just to the left of where this is that is called the gate of hell. And so Jesus was standing somewhere in this area when he said these words. And when you get to stand there and just put all that together, it's a pretty incredible thing that brings scripture into a very amazing context for you. So that's a little bit from Caesarea Philippi. There's not a lot to see there, just a lot of rock. There's some architecture, there's some water when they're not in a drought. But it's another amazing site to read scripture because so much happened there. We're going to get back on the bus and make our way over to Bet Shean. This is maybe my second most favorite site because, again, it's a huge Roman city, and you could spend 2 or 3 days walking through this site. You can see in this picture right here the huge Roman road that's running right down through the middle of the city. All these columns, these would have all been filled with columns, you know, back in the day. Shops and all kinds of business would have happened right here on this main street. And this thing you'll see in the next picture goes a long way. Up here on the top of this hill, though, is where they fastened the body of Saul and his sons whenever they fell. So you see that scripture there from 1 Samuel 31, 8 through 10. When the Philistines slain Saul, they brought him here to Bet Shean, but it would have been then it was up on top of the hill is where it was. I have another picture here kind of showing the massiveness of the ruins down here in this layout, and a little bit better picture of where Bet Shean would have been at the time of Saul. So there's some rubble and some ruins and some excavations that have happened up here on the top, but there's not near as much as down here from the Roman period down here on the bottom. So there are bathhouses here, and you can see how the plumbing worked and how the Romans got the water hot, and it's just absolutely fabulous and amazing. And we spend usually about 2 hours at this site whenever we're on tour in Israel, and give people plenty of time to walk around. This is the amphitheater that was built. You see this right whenever you come in. This is part of it. And it actually went up higher. They had to reconstruct this because it was destroyed in an earthquake. But the amphitheater went up much higher when it was originally built. But these are the original stones from it. So again, just a cool place to sit and kind of take in all that happened here. Great Old Testament site, and a great site for anybody who loves Roman history. We're going to get back on the bus and move on to Tel Dan, another amazing site. Tel Dan is kind of out in the middle of a desert. It's kind of this oasis, and it's fed by these major natural springs. This water literally comes up ice cold and just fresh out of the ground from these faults that are in the ground there. And the river is not very long. It's called the Dan River. It's only about 12 miles long, and it flows into the Jordan River. But it provides over 238 million cubic meters of water a year in an annual year. So it's hard to explain how much water is rushing through this little bitty river, but every time I've been there, it's been pretty amazing. There's a natural park area, and they've developed these pools for the water to come out. In the summertime, you'll see people, hanging out here and just soaking up in these pools. It's a beautiful park to do a hike through, which we do as we explore the ruins here at Tel Dan. Tel Dan's a great excavation site because you can see how defensive perimeters were constructed. It's kind of hard for me to tell you in the picture here, but this was used as part of the defense for this city. When they were under attack, there would be a large garrison of men who would have been in this room, and they would be able to pour out of this door if anybody breached through the city gates. So it's a lot easier to explain whenever you're there, and I'm not going to take a lot of time to try to explain it because a picture just really doesn't do that justice. This next picture is from Tel Dan as well, and this would have been the judgment seat that was at the gate. You can see it down here. Of course, it would have been built up and been much bigger, but this is where the king would come out and sit at the gate, and everybody who needed to come and talk to the king or to get a judgment about something would have come to this judgment seat. It's pretty cool. It's actually here too in Tel Dan that the only record we have of King David's existence was uncovered here in Tel Dan. So cool archaeological site. But as you make your way around the back of Tel Dan, you come to this. And this to me just takes my breath away every single time I see it. This is a gate. I don't know, there's it's filled in here, but this used to be a gate or a door. It's packed in with earth and mud, but you can see the archway here, right? The gate, the walls of this. So this actually dates back to the time of Abraham. You'll probably remember when Abraham's nephew Lot was captured, and Abraham set out to rescue him. He followed Lot's trail for over 200 miles to the north. And he ended up here near the city of Dan. That's where he rescued Lot. And we know that after that happened, he spent a little bit of time here in this city. So we know, and this is just hard for me to fathom, but Abraham would have walked up these steps and he would have went through this gate in his day. That was a long, long time ago. And it's absolutely fascinating to me every time I stand here and see that. You can see they've built a roof over it. They're trying to preserve this and protect this because it's such a fascinating historical site. So another great site that we get to see on our way moving away from the Sea of Galilee. All right, we're going to jump back on the bus and we're going to go far to the south and check into our Dead Sea Resort. This was the place we stayed last time we were at the Dead Sea, probably the nicest place we stayed on the whole trip. All the places we stay are nice, but these resorts out near the Dead Sea are incredible. The Dead Sea is back here in the back. You can kind of see it, but the unique thing about this picture is they actually pump in water from the Dead Sea into these pools. So if you don't want to go swim in the Dead Sea, you can just swim in this pretty pool and lounge up here in your off time. But the favorite thing for everybody to do at the Dead Sea is to go and float. If you don't know how to swim, no problem. In the Dead Sea, you can't sink to the bottom. You literally are weightless when you get into the water. It is the most incredible and weird thing
Strange.
of all. It's just something you have to do. It's not something you can explain, but this is Peter and I just floating. Peter's kind of bobbing. The water's probably 10, 12 feet deep here where we're floating, and you just float up on top of it. It's
I went in
really
January
amazing.
and it was 40 degrees outside because my trip was this January, and I still insisted on getting in the water because how could you not? And it was amazing. So strange though.
And then here is a picture of the sunset from our resort there over the Dead Sea. So beautiful sunsets and beautiful sunrises, and just absolutely gorgeous part of the country, but it is desert. And so from here, we don't just come down here to swim, we come down here to see some sites as well. And one of those sites is the site known as Masada. Now Masada doesn't have a ton of biblical meaning or faith meaning to us as Christians, but it is an incredible site. So there's two ways to get to Masada. You can ride the gondola up, which is what I highly recommend because it's a long way up, or you can actually hike to the top. If you want to take a couple of hours and go a couple of miles and a couple of thousand feet in elevation up, you can do that as well. So we always ride the gondola for the sake of time, and it lands up here on top, and then you can get out and explore all of these ruins. It is huge. It's much bigger than it looks here in this picture, but it's got storerooms and cisterns and water stuff. I mean, this is desert. Look out here around, guys. It's just desert out here. The fact that people could live out here and engineer a city up on top here is amazing. King Herod is the mastermind behind this as well. This was his Alamo, if you will. This was his, if everything goes to pot and I've got to get somewhere where I can be safe, I'm going to Masada. We don't know that he ever spent a single night here, but he built this fortress out here for his Alamo to be the place that he would go if they ever came under attack and were losing. Here on this ridge line, there were 3 palaces, and I'm going to show a rendering of this in a minute. But there was an upper, a middle, and then kind of a lower level. And when I say lower, it's still several thousand feet down to the bottom. It's up pretty high. But this is where he would have been. And then his army, his troops, the people who maintain this place would have lived up here on top. The other thing I want to show you is over here. Do you see this ramp or this line of dirt? This is the siege ramp that the Romans built in order to conquer this defensive position. I forget how many people, I think it was about 20,000 soldiers worked for over a year or maybe 2 years to build this ramp, because the only way they could get up there was to build a ramp out of earth. And they built this ramp and finally got up there and were able to take the stronghold. But the ramp is still there. I mean, you're not going to take that down. There's no reason to take it down, but it's pretty cool. It used to come, all the way up, so it was higher. Over time, just rain and wind and everything has degraded it some. But it's amazing to stand there and look down and think about the Romans below building this massive dirt ramp to get up there and take you out, basically. So here's a rendering of what the palaces might have looked like or would have looked like there on the ledge. It was a pretty impressive place, definitely built for a king. It would have been tricked out with all the stuff a king would want. This is an actual picture of how you get down to explore those areas. This may look kind of scary, but it's got super high railing around it, and you're not walking on nothing. You're walking on solid rock. So if you're scared of heights, even you could probably go down this. But going down and exploring these palaces is definitely worth the walk at Masada. So we're going to move on now to Qumran. Qumran is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. You will see here, and this is just a few miles from Masada. It's out in the same desert. You see these holes here in the sides of these hills. These are all caves that have been uncovered, and many of these had what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls in them. Here's another shot of a couple more caves that were found. They were actually just discovered by accident by a Bedouin shepherd. He was out here with his flock and stumbled upon one of these caves that had all these ancient scrolls in them, and really validated what we believe about the Bible. We also try to go to the Shrine of the Book on some of our trips, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls now are housed. They don't keep them in these caves anymore for obvious reasons, but it's pretty cool to see how well protected these manuscripts were stored away up here in these caves. And they lasted so long on the parchment because of the dry conditions out here in the desert. Qumran was actually a place where a lot of people lived, but this place has a lot of mystery to it. Of all the places we go, this is one of the most mysterious. We don't really know how many people lived here. We don't really know who lived here or for how long they lived here. It's thought that they were some kind of a Hebrew sect that wanted they wanted privacy. They wanted to be out of Jerusalem, and they just wanted to be away from everybody else. And so they built this community out here. It was a huge complex. And one of the interesting things, or kind of the mystery about it, is they have all these ritual bath areas. I mean, I forget how many there are, but they're just everywhere. Like, you go up these steps and go over here and there'll be another one. And this is probably another one. There's all these ritual bath areas here. So that was one thing we know. They were serious about taking their ritual baths. Another thing that was very unique about this place is they found a super extravagant number of oil lamps. The little lamps that look like this. I'm not saying this came from Qumran. I just grabbed this off the internet, but they found just piles and piles and thousands of these oil lamps. And so it's thought that they worked 24 hours a day in shifts to write the Dead Sea Scrolls, to write on the parchment. It's thought that they stayed up at night and they read aloud. They took turns again and worked in shifts to read aloud the scrolls, the Word of God. It's thought that maybe they worked at night because it was cooler to work at night, and then during the day is when they would sleep and try to rest in the shady areas. Nobody really knows, but again, just another interesting fact that they found so many of these oil lamps here at Qumran. Just down the road from Qumran is what we call David's waterfall, or it's also known as En-Gedi. If you read in 1 Samuel chapter 23, 29, it says from there, David went up and stayed at the strongholds of En-Gedi. And in 1 Samuel 24, it also reports that King David was here at En-Gedi. This is another beautiful spot. It's a little bit of a hike to get to where the waterfall is, but it's out in the middle of this desert. It's just a few miles from Qumran, just a few miles from Masada. And there's this beautiful little oasis and waterfall. And again, just powerful to think that King David was here with his mighty men. He would have drank from here and rested here and been nourished here. There's also prophecy around the En-Gedi. In Ezekiel 47:10, we're told that En-Gedi is going to become a fishing village in the end times, because the Dead Sea is going to come alive with living things again. And just a fun fact for you guys, this seminar is not about end times or Revelation or Jesus coming back, but a fun fact, scientists have recently as last year, started detecting life in the Dead Sea. Not the Dead Sea itself, but in the pools of water right around the Dead Sea. They've started detecting life and some small fish in that area, which has never been detected before. So take that for what it is. Again, the Bible just coming true right before our eyes, slowly but surely. So again, a bit of a hike to get there. 2 of the times that I've been, it hasn't been open. We haven't been able to go back there for various reasons, but the one time I did get to go back there, man, it is just beautiful. We take our sandals and shoes off and get in the water and just cool off out there in the middle of the desert, and just imagine we're with King David and the mighty men sitting around down here taking a break. So pretty incredible, surreal place. One last look at the Dead Sea as we travel in our air-conditioned motor coach across land to the city of Jericho. Jericho is the oldest city on earth. And when I say that, it's the oldest continually inhabited city on earth. And again, just another fascinating site. There's not as much to see there, which is why I've put this rendering up. You can see the 2 walls, the inner wall and the outer wall, the city between the walls. It's built up on top of this hill, and it's just an absolutely fascinating thing. I show this to you so you can kind of make sense. Here are some of the guard towers, so you can kind of make sense of the pictures you're going to see in a second. Again, a rendering of what the walls would have looked like from the ground. That would have been a pretty imposing thing to look at if you were Joshua or in the army of God marching around this thing every single day. This is one of the watchtowers, the ruins from one of the watchtowers down here. So you can see that here at Jericho. And also here, more interesting to me, you can see the remains of the outer wall. This would have been the retaining wall, the outside wall here that's been excavated and exposed for people like you and I to be able to go and see. So another incredible site. Again, we spend probably an hour here walking around. There's a trail that goes up here and you can look into all the excavated pits. And it's just a fabulous site. We read a lot of scripture here, but for tonight, we just don't have the time to hang out in Jericho much longer. I do want to take you over to Jacob's Well. Now, this is in the West Bank. This is in Palestinian territory. So is Jericho, by the way. So when we do go into Palestinian territory. We do go into the West Bank, but we don't go into the Gaza Strip. We don't go into the places where the fighting is bad and things like that. To me, Jacob's Well, again, is just one of these places you got to go. Most tours, most groups do not go to Jacob's Well. And the reason is it's a couple of hours from anything else. And you've got to really want to go there. It's not because it's dangerous or anything. You've just got to really want to go there. There's not a whole lot else to see out there. But man, this is Jacob's Well. There's so much Old Testament stuff here. And this is where Jesus had the conversation with the woman at the well, remember? So to me, anytime you can go to a place where you know Jesus was here, Jesus drew water, or the woman drew water out of this well for Jesus, you just got to go to a place like that. So you can see the well here. You can see that the well is deep. It's about 135 feet deep, which is deep for a hand dug well. And again, a church has been built over it. You have to go into the church and go down. Feels like you're going into the basement to get to the well, but you can draw water up. You can fill your water bottle up out of this well. You can drink this water. It is very, very, very good water, and it's an amazing place to be, knowing that Jesus was here. Another interesting thing is that this is near the place where Joseph was buried. Remember when God's people left Egypt and they came out of Egypt, they brought the bones of Joseph with them, and they buried him in Shechem. So Shechem is where Jacob's well is, and it's, I don't know, probably a mile from here is where the bones of Joseph were buried. So another pretty cool thing about it. Just outside of the town where Jacob's well is the only Samaritan village on the planet. It's up on top of one of the hills there, and we always, if we have time, take a trip and drive up there in the bus. And every time we've gone, we've run into some of these guys going to church, and they've always been great to stop and take pictures with us. This time we're some kids, sometimes it's adults, but it's pretty cool to get to talk to an actual Samaritan. From there, we hop back on the bus and we make our way back to Jerusalem. And normally we arrive in Jerusalem at night. This is a pretty incredible picture of Jerusalem and the Dome of the Rock at night. Normally we would get something to eat and get a good night's sleep, and then get up and start our journeys around Jerusalem the next day. I'm going to let Abby talk a little bit. We're going to move over to Bethlehem and just pretend it's the next morning and we got up and we drove to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is actually also Palestinian territory. It's in the West Bank. Even though it's just a few miles outside of Jerusalem, you do have to go through a checkpoint to get into Bethlehem. So there's a couple of really, really cool things to see in Bethlehem, and I'm going to let Abby talk about those.
All right. So in Bethlehem, when we were in Bethlehem, we actually ate with a family, a local family, ate lunch there at their house. And so we didn't spend time going in this church or anything, but my favorite part of Bethlehem was the shepherd's field. And there's shepherd's fields all outside of Bethlehem. So you can kind of picture Bethlehem is still a city where people live, and then all outside on the hills where shepherds would be staying out there and watching their sheep at night. So, but this is the area where the angel of the Lord stood before the shepherds and said, and told them that today a savior was born in the city of David. And so I just like to picture, I'm going to show you some other pictures that you can see it a little bit better. There's caves all around here. This one actually has a meeting place in it, but you can see the ceiling is black, where there would have been many fires keeping everyone warm, and they would bring their flocks into these caves. There's quite a number of them, and they would have all been used by these shepherds. Here's one that I actually went in that is still pretty primitive, but they had holes, you know, in the top of them where you could start a fire and the smoke could go out, and they could gather their sheep in here. But you can just get a picture of the shepherds being out here on these fields with all their sheep. And the shepherds were the most despised occupation in Jewish literature. And so to sit here and to reflect on the Lord allowing these common people to get the news that they got, to be able to be the first ones to hear that the Messiah was born, and just to think about how dark it would have been in these fields. I mean, there was still a little town out here, but of course there would have been no street lights. It would have been dark out there. And then it says that the angel appeared and that they were terrified. And you can just imagine how bright the light would have been out there. Let me read it to you, the passage right here. I'd love to just sit out here and think, and this is where everything changed. These common stinky shepherds were out here, and then the Lord allowed them to hear this precious, precious news of Jesus's birth. And it says in Luke 2, and in the same region there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear. And the angel said to them, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." And that's Luke 2, 8 through 11. And the shepherds they would have been outside the city, and then would have to make a journey into town in order to see this thing that had happened. But interestingly enough, this is also the area where Boaz would have owned land here, and had Boaz's fields where the story in Ruth would have taken place. So you just have to sit up here and stare at this and think, okay, 3,000 plus years ago, this was Boaz was growing grain out here, and this is where Ruth came. And then this is also where just the most precious news to these common men would have been received right here on these fields.
Yeah, absolutely. The shepherd's fields are incredible, and going into those caves and just getting a sense of it is just breathtaking. I wish there was a way to get it across in picture, but it's just really hard to do. This is called the Church of the Nativity. It's in Bethlehem. Like I said at the beginning of this, there's a church built over everything. This is a church, I believe, that the Crusaders built in the Crusader time. You can see down here, it's kind of hard to see this little bitty opening down here is the door. And that door doesn't just look small because it's far away. It is small. You have to bend over. I would say the top of that door comes up to about my belly button. And I asked on my very first trip, I was like, man, why'd they build the door so small? Were people short back then or what? And I hadn't thought about it, but my tour guide said, no, this was built by the Crusaders, and they built all doors small where you had to bend over to get into them, because that way, if you were a bad guy, when you bent over to get in, they'd just chop your head off. It made it harder to get in. It made it harder to be attacked because there was no easy way for a ton of people to just pour in to your fortress, if you will. And so you got to bend down to get in. There is a big door now for the public, but if you want to go through the authentic door, you go through the Crusader door down here in the Church of the Nativity. This is the place that they say Jesus was born. I don't know if this is the actual place, but when you go into the church, there are caves kind of down beneath it that are said to have been the stables where Jesus would have been. It's marked this way as being the place that Jesus was born. This church is run by, I believe, the Orthodox, Greco-Orthodox or something. So they use all of these different ornaments and stuff for different reasons, but you do get to walk down and actually, see what they say is the actual place where Jesus was born. You have to wait in a little bit of a line usually, but it's pretty cool. Whether or not this is the actual spot, who knows? This next picture, though, we do know this is the actual spot. So St. Jerome's cave is here in the Church of the Nativity. St. Jerome spent 30 years of his life translating the Bible. He was the one who translated the Bible from Hebrew and Greek into Latin. And then, of course, once it was translated into Latin, then it was translated later into English, the King James being the first English version. So this is called St. Jerome's Cave. This was his office for 30 years as he poured over the Greek and Hebrew manuscripts to eventually make a Latin Bible that would eventually lead to all the different translations of the Bible that we have today. So another just really special place, church history place. We don't just see biblical places when we're in Israel. We do a lot of church history stuff as well, which we haven't highlighted that much in this virtual tour. Again, just for the sake of time, but I wanted to really make sure I put this one in. Here is just a picture of the streets, what they would look like in Jerusalem or even in Nazareth. you can see these old buildings, probably older than all of us, and they're very narrow and surprisingly not very crowded, except up in the market areas and places like that. So you get to walk down these streets through all these cities, which is pretty cool. Another site here in Jerusalem that's one of my favorite, or one we spend a lot of time at, which is commonly known as the Dome of the Rock. This is Mount Moriah, where Abraham offers Isaac and is saved at the last moment from having to kill his son. That happened right up here. This is where the temple was. You're actually standing on what would have been the floor of the temple area when you're up on the Dome of the Rock. So we know that this is where Jesus, for example, was presented as a child. We know that this is where his mom and dad left him and forgot about him when he was 12 and they headed home and he was still here. We know this is where he ran out the money changers. We know this is where the disciples preached the good news after Jesus was resurrected from the dead. So there's so much stuff that happened up here on the temple, and of course, a lot more stuff that we talk about as well. But those are just some of the highlights. And we stand up there and talk about those. And then again, as with all these places, we give you 30 minutes or 45 minutes to walk around, take pictures, pray, journal, draw, do whatever you want. You cannot go inside of the Dome of the Rock, but if you're allowed up there, as we were on this trip, you can walk right up to it and look at it. If you don't know, this is one of the most holy sites in the Muslim world. So interestingly, when you go up onto the Dome of the Rock, you are not allowed to carry a Bible. They search you before you go in for weapons and other things, but one of the things they search you for is a Bible. And if you have a Bible, they'll confiscate it and they don't give it back either. So the tour guide will always tell you, make sure you don't bring your Bible with you because they will take it. It is now run by the Muslims. Abby actually didn't get to go up on the Dome of the Rock, and I've only gotten to go up once. This is the only trip this picture that I have is the only time I've actually gotten to go up on the Dome of the Rock, because it's a very contentious area. And anytime there's any kind of tension in Jerusalem, they basically just start separating everybody. In the Dome of the Rock, they will only let Muslims go into if there's any tension. But on this particular trip, everything was nice and peaceful and calm. And so they let us go up there, and it was a super, super cool experience. Right down on the other side of this is the Western Wall, or the praying wall. This is the only part of the temple that's still intact. And this is one of the most sacred places for Jewish people. They are here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, rain, snow, sleet, or shine, praying. Now, there won't be as big of a crowd if the weather's bad, but there's always people down here praying and reading and reciting God's word here at the temple. And you're allowed to go up and pray at the wall, or as you can see in the cracks, I think you can see in the cracks over here, these little pieces of paper. That's the most common thing. People write their prayers down and then put them in the cracks. And every trip I've been on, people have given me prayer requests and little pieces of paper and said, would you please put this at the Western Wall? And of course, I certainly do. So another cool site. Men and women are segregated here. There's a curtain that divides them. And so men pray on one side and women pray on the other. And I have a picture of that, but I didn't put it in just for the sake of time. This is actually underneath. This is called the Western Wall tunnels. And so you can go under street level because the wall goes down quite a bit further, and you can take a tour. And man, this tour is absolutely fascinating. Some of these stones, I'm told, were actually the stones that were set by Nehemiah and his men when they rebuilt the wall in Jerusalem. Another interesting thing is just how big these stones are. I don't have a picture of this particular stone, but there is one stone there that is 40 feet long. It's a solid piece of stone. It's 12 feet high and it's 14 feet thick. And people who've done the calculations say it weighs somewhere around 600 tons. And nobody knows how they got it there, how they built it there, how they moved it there. It is absolutely amazing how big some of these stones are. And they didn't use any mortar putting it together. They used dry construction to put it together because these stones were just so well fitted and so large. They didn't even need mortar to put them together. So that is a cool part of the tour to go down beneath and see all of that as well. Again, pictures can only show you so much. I could talk about it for another 20 minutes, but that kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like subsurface. Around Jerusalem, there are just all kinds of places that Jesus was. I'm just going to show this one. This is one of the places Jesus performed a miracle. Right behind us is an awesome church called St. Anne's Church, which is a Crusader church, and it's here near the pool. This has all been excavated at this point, but again, we know Jesus was here. We know Jesus healed somebody here, and it's just a fabulous place to sit and soak and just feel the presence of God move in this place. With our last few minutes, I want to take us to the Garden of Gethsemane, and then a little bit through the Passion of Jesus, and then we're going to wrap things up tonight. So thank you guys so much for hanging in. Again, if you have questions or want us to talk about something else towards the end, now would be a good time to start putting those in the comments, and we will try to address everything we can before the end of tonight. So this is the Garden of Gethsemane. We don't know that this is the exact place that Jesus was, but we're talking 100 yards this way or 100 yards that way. He was right in this area. Some of these olive trees are over 2,000 years old. Some of these trees could have been here when Jesus was here. It's pretty crazy to think about, but it's just that kind of place. We try to visit this first thing in the morning. It's a very peaceful place to come first thing in the morning, and we spend a lot of time just reading scripture and just talking about what all happened here. And it's a very quiet place. It's a solemn place. You won't hear a lot of the places you go. You hear the tour guides talking, you hear preachers preaching, but that's not allowed here in the garden. This is really just a place of prayer. And so we do some whispering while we're in there. We do some teaching outside, but then once you go in, you just get to spend some time praying there in the garden. So this next picture here is the Church of All Nations. And this is probably the best name for this church, because this is supposed to be the place where Jesus prayed on the night he was betrayed, where Jesus sweat the drops of blood, and ultimately where they came and arrested Jesus, where Judas gave him the famous kiss of betrayal, and then he was arrested here at the Church of All Nations. So this is a rock inside of the church. This is supposed to be the rock that Jesus prayed on, and is supposed to be the place or near the place where he was arrested. And so just again, it's crowded when you're there and there's people all around, but you just cannot help but feel the power of God and feel the presence and the magnitude of what happened in this place. So just a powerful, powerful place to come whenever you're there. This next one here gets me every single time. So Jesus walked on these steps after he was arrested, as he was led from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. This would have been the route they took. This was the way they went. Like, there's no question about that. These are first century steps, and Jesus walked across these steps. You can't walk on them anymore. They're roped off. People don't walk on them anymore, but we know that Jesus walked on these steps shortly after he was arrested. So it's pretty cool to do that. As you start your way back into Jerusalem, you will walk beside these steps, but Jesus actually walked on these steps. We don't have time to go through the entire Via Dolorosa today. We're not going to do that, but on the tour we do. We go through all the stations of the cross as we move through Jerusalem. But I do want to take you to this place. This is Cephas's house, and This is where Jesus would have been brought as part of his trials and his imprisonment. It's believed that he was held here for a few hours at least, maybe as long as 8 to 10 hours here. And this hole you see in the roof, you can actually go down. This picture is taken from down in the cell. But in the time of Jesus, there wouldn't have been a way to go down into the cell except through the hole. So what they would do is they would lower you through the floor up above, through the hole, down into the cell, and they would just leave you there. And if you got any water or food or anything else, it came down through the hole. It was kind of like a cave underneath the house. And it was time to get you out. The same thing. They'd drop a rope down, wrap it around you, and they would pull you up through this little bitty hole. It's not a very big hole. I don't think they could get me through that hole. Don't laugh. So it's not very big, but man, when you're down there and you're thinking Jesus spent the night here before he died for my sins, it is just one of the most moving and powerful things of your life. Because again, some of these places we were like, yeah, it was close. It was around here. It was one of these spots. It was one of these hills. And then some of them were like, this is the spot. And this, we have no way to be 100% sure that this is the spot, but this is probably the spot, which is a very, 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 very powerful experience. This next picture here is inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where Jesus was crucified. I put on here the place of crucifixion. Right underneath this altar, there's a hole in the rock, and you can't really see it from the picture, but there's a hole here. And normally there's a line of people, and you just come through one by one. And they've built this altar over it, so you can't stand over the hole and look down in it. You really, the only way to see it is to get on your knees and to show reverence is why they've done it. So people come through here, they get on their knees, and then you can stick your hand in the hole, or you can reach in and touch the hole. But this is, again, more than likely the place that the cross of Jesus was put into, where he died, up there on the hill. It's hard to see it. When you go into the church, you can see the hill. The church is massive from the outside. And when you go in, you have to go up a number of steps to get up here on top of where the hill would have been, and see where the cross would have been. Another just absolutely powerful, powerful place. It does take away from it some because of all this stuff, and because there are thousands of people in here usually whenever you go. It's kind of loud because people are talking and tour guides are talking, but if you can drum all of that out and just put yourself there, it's powerful. It's really, really, really powerful. Let's see here. This is going to be the last kind of tour spot that we're going to talk about. This is the Garden Tomb. And this is probably not where Jesus was put in the tomb. It's not where I believe Jesus was put in the tomb, but we go to this spot because it's probably what the garden looked like and the tomb of Jesus looked like. It is a 1st century tomb. We know that. And you can go inside of it and you can just really get a feel inside of this area of what the garden might have been like. And so we go here, we tour the garden, we hear why, some people say this is where the garden is. But one of the most special things we do here, it's right at the end of the trip when we come to the Garden Tomb, and we take communion here in the garden. It's pretty peaceful, and it's just a great spot for us to just kind of recap and talk about all that God has done in our lives, and then visit with each other about what God's doing, and just really reflect on the entire trip. So that's kind of that. So we're going to get back to some of these questions. Thank you guys who are putting them in there. I know Abby maybe is answering a few of them, but we are going to get to them. Don't worry. I do have a couple of last minute things that people always ask that I want to go over before we jump into the questions. One of the things we get all the time is, well, what are the hotels like? And probably more important than what are the hotels like, what is the food like? the food is incredible. Let me just say, no matter what you like to eat, the food is good. If you got a sweet tooth, you're going to love Israel. If you're healthy and gluten-free, you're still going to love Israel. All right. It's the hotels we stay in are top notch. There's a buffet for breakfast and a buffet for dinner every single day. And it's an incredible display of culinary excellence. Excellence. You can see here in the video, there's just a plethora of different things that you can eat. Meat, salads, soups, desserts, all kinds of stuff. You will not go hungry whenever you're there. In the mornings, they have chefs cooking eggs and pancakes and waffles, and they'll cook them any way you want them, making omelets. It's really, really a good experience when it comes to the food. There's always fresh fruit everywhere you go. Plenty of fresh fruit and stuff for along the way. For lunch, we stop for lunch. We try to make it a quick stop, 45 minutes to an hour, which is quick when you have a group of 30, 40, or 50. You do have to buy lunch. Breakfast and dinner are included on all of our trips, but you buy lunch. We try to stop at a restaurant or a place that has some kind of significance. For example, this picture here is actually was a Crusader castle, which is now a restaurant near the Sea of Galilee. And so it's a pretty cool place to stop and eat. It's a little bit crowded inside of there just from the way this thing was constructed, but it's cool to eat inside of something that the Crusaders built. And then last but not least, just one more beautiful, amazing sunset over the Sea of Galilee. I believe this is one Abby took on her trip, or was that a sunrise?
That was a sunrise.
Sunrise. Man, the views in Israel will just be breathtaking, and you will not regret. If you ever get the opportunity to go, you'll never regret it. You'll never, ever forget it. Last plug here for anybody that wants to become a Patreon supporter. And I want to just thank again our patron supporters who help make these webinars possible. Every month we do a different webinar, and there's all kinds of other stuff there on my Patreon community. So you can write that website down or email me if you're interested in that. And then the details on our next trip can be found at pastorpetetx.org. All right, well, let's get to some of these questions and we'll answer them as best we can. Let's see, what do we have first?
We have not answered Violet's question about Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem is not on our next tour. Again, we just have to pick and choose what we can do. We do have a free afternoon, though, on our next tour. And so I put the free afternoon in there on purpose. It's in Jerusalem. It's on our last full day. And so if you wanted to go to Yad Vashem and there were some other people who wanted to go with you, or even if you wanted to go by yourself, you can take a taxi or a cab and go over there. It is not on the tour, but there would be an afternoon or an opportunity for you to go. I have been. Abby, I think, got to go on her tour.
It's the Holocaust Museum. It's a beautifully done museum. You need a good bit of time there because you could walk in for an hour or you could stay in there for 3 hours, but it's very emotionally draining if you stay in there. And I stayed and looked at every single thing that I could, but you need a good half day to be able to go through it and really see all of it. It's a beautifully done museum.
Yeah, and there are multiple museums in Jerusalem. So there's Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum. There's a museum that just has the Israel Museum, which is kind of like the Smithsonian for all of their archaeological stuff. All the original stuff that they've dug up over the years is in that museum. They also have the Shrine of the Book, which has all of the Dead Sea Scrolls in it. And then there's a war museum as well. And so that's, again, you can pick and choose if you wanted to do one of those on the free afternoon. That would be great. Joy, you asked if the place of the skull is covered by this church. The answer to that is yes. It is a huge church, a massive church. You almost can't believe how big it is. But yes, it's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it covers what would have been Golgotha just outside of the city walls. Bethlehem was my favorite place. Who was that? My mom.
Mm,
So my mom said Bethlehem was her favorite place.
and communion in the garden.
Communion, yeah. Any other questions? We're looking through here to just make sure we don't miss anybody. As we do, guys, thank you all so much for joining us for this virtual tour. We would love to be able to take everybody. If you ever get a chance to go, you should go. And I know I hear so many people say, I want to go. I'm going to go later. I'm going to go at another time. Man, if you can go, go, because there may not be a later. That part of the world, that's one of the reasons Abby went. We really wanted to go together, but that part of the world is so volatile. In 2 or 3 years, we may not be able to go there. I was talking to a lady who really wanted to go on the last trip, and she decided last minute not to go. And she was saying, man, I wish I would have went, because if I would have known the coronavirus was going to come up, I may never get to go now. I may never have the opportunity to go to Israel, and I wish I would have taken it. And so, you know, it's over a year away. You can make payments. The tour company that we use for this is actually doing a 2-for-1 right now when it comes to the deposit. So instead of a $500 per person deposit, you only have to do a $250 deposit if 2 of you sign up. So basically for $500, 2 of you can reserve your spot. Again, all these details are at pastorpetetx.org. And then you can pay it off over the next year. And I know it's expensive, but trust me, there's not a cheaper way to do it. There's not a better way to do it. We don't skimp on the food. We don't skimp on the hotel. We don't skip on the bus. You're going to have air conditioning the whole way. We don't skip on the translators. We don't skip on the tour guides. I want you to have a first-class experience when you go, and I promise you there's not a cheaper way to get that. So the question about internet access, yes, you do have internet access. In fact, even on our bus, on our last tour, our bus had internet. It was somewhat intermittent around the Sea of Galilee and some other places, but technically we were supposed to have internet access even on the bus. The hotels, as far as I can remember, all have high-speed internet. Internet is not an issue. So thank you guys so much again for being on here. I don't see any other questions. I just want to pray for you, and thank you for being on. We are always available to talk. If you know of anybody that has a church that would want us to come and do a presentation on a Sunday evening or Wednesday night, we can certainly shorten this down and do, you know, even fewer sites, but come show pictures and talk about it. It's a place Abby and I both dearly love, a place we want to go back to many more times, and a place that just continually teaches us over and over. So let me pray for you, and we'll be dismissed tonight. If you have any more questions, put them in the comments or reach out to us, and we will certainly try to answer them. Father God, we thank you for this time we've had together. I thank you for these men and women, Lord, who have gathered to just see your land. And I know we didn't get to walk there physically, but Father, even just seeing the pictures and hearing the stories, Lord, I just pray will bless their hearts. I pray that they will go back and read through some of these scriptures and consider some of these things that we've talked about. And Lord, I pray that you would make a way for them to be able to go on one of these trips one day soon, Father, so that they could see it with their own eyes and hear it with their own ears and be there themselves. Lord, just help them as they walk through whatever they're going to walk through this week, Lord. I just pray that you give them wisdom, and Father, that you bless them as they walk with you in the days ahead. Lord, we love you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys, good night. Goodbye. Thank you again so much for being on here. I will end the call.